All right, welcome back, everybody. See if we can.
Yes. All right. Here we go. Here is our next presentation in the Lemuria Awakening Retreat. And this is pretty special because the Lemurian Fellowship is in Ramona, California. And miraculously, a huge fire that blazed through there a few years ago went around their complex. Most of the homes in the area were destroyed, burnt to the ground, but it was saved. The Lemurian Fellowship was saved. And it's beautiful, the information and the wisdom that they bring forward. And we're really looking forward to this presentation. Lori, thank you for introducing the Lemurian Fellowship.
We want to welcome Conrad, Sally, and Bob, longtime students of the teachings of the masters of the Lemurian Mystery School, who live and work in Ramona, California. Each has devoted their life to furthering the great work of these highly advanced human beings to guide humanity in using God's universal laws to usher in a new civilization, exemplifying the promised kingdom of God. So their topic today is For a New Lemuria. I know they're going to tell you all about it, and also a little bit about your founder, right? Okay, terrific. So I'm going to pass the mic.
Sounds good. Will that do it? Okay. I'm Conrad, and my friends and I work at the Lemurian Fellowship in the beautiful Santa Maria Valley south of here. We're grateful for this opportunity to tell you about our work and about our founder, who had much to do with bringing back much that we know about Lemuria today. The Lemurian Fellowship is a preparatory school for Lemurian initiation, guided by the masters of the Lemurian Mystery School. You may know this is one of 7 mystery schools of masters that work most closely with those of us here on Earth. Among the workshop highlights proposed for this retreat is a very thoughtful challenge. Prepare to remember and renew your soul's vows and realign with your soul's mission. This is part of the purpose of human life on Earth as we understand it, so we want to talk about that today. I believe another part of the motivation, your motivation in coming here, is a burning desire to help create and live in a much better world than we see around us. These desires have prompted thousands of people to enroll as Lemurian Fellowship students over the past 80 plus years. And it's the reason the Lemurian Masters are releasing the Lemurian teachings today. I wonder how many of you have had the privilege of knowing a truly advanced human being. It's rare to encounter these men and women of superlative ability and character. They usually incarnate with a special mission and seem animated by a driving desire to address some critically important need, setting aside their own desires to help others. It can be intensely inspiring to be around these people. And for those who aspire to greatness themselves, it can be life-changing. Think of those fishermen of Galilee who answered Christ's invitation to join him and how their lives were transformed. Most of us are not prepared for the kinds of sacrifices the apostles made, but all of us seem animated by a driving urge to address some critically important need. You have undoubtedly come here looking for something beyond the ordinary, ready to respond to the inspiration of exceptional people, and we want to tell you about one. Lemurian Fellowship and Order members are privileged to know one such person, Robert D. Stelle, the founder of the Lemurian Fellowship. He's our finest example of the Lemurian teachings, and which he transcribed for us from the greater beings who worked through him. How can we know a man we haven't met personally? We study the teachings that he transcribed for us and try to live them every day. His wife wrote a book about his adventurous life that we never tire of reading. And he himself wrote a book about a very early incarnation when he helped build the first civilization on Earth. Through his descriptions and lively drawings, we can see scenes he took clairvoyantly from the Akashic record. And we're grateful he could draw us so descriptively, because how else could any of us see those scenes from so many thousands of years ago? Robert Stelle, born on a Missouri farm in 1881, was no paragon as a child. As a toddler, he walked proudly up to his parents, who were sitting at the back porch of their house with a coiled rattlesnake in his arms. That created a bit of a problem. And at 6, he was given a pocket knife, and he carved a rather artistic skull and crossbones into the side of his mother's grand piano. He said the results of that experience kept him in standing position for a few days afterward. But beneath the exuberant childish experiences was a deeply sensitive nature, attuned to all that was happening around him, including many things other people couldn't experience, and so, of course, did not believe. After several spankings from telling his parents about the things that he was seeing, he decided to keep them to himself. Later, he understood he was contacting the Akashic record, and soon his advancement and well-developed clairvoyant abilities enabled more advanced beings to contact and work with him on a vitally important project that became his outstanding purpose in life. Much later, when Dr. Stelle lived at the fellowship in Ramona, he and some of the staff members were sitting in front of the house where they lived one evening, and there were 3 large eucalyptus trees in front of that house. Their dog was sitting at the base of the eucalyptus trees, and Dr. Stelle told the others to take a look at what the dog was doing, because he had turned and as though he was looking at something. Dr. Stelle explained that he was looking at a diva, a nature spirit from those eucalyptus trees, and he called that diva Eucalypt. Mrs. Stelle said when she'd be working in the kitchen or the office, sometimes Eucalypt would come close enough that she could smell the fragrance of the eucalyptus and knew that he was there. Young Bob didn't let the punishment for his skull and crossbones keep him from developing his artistic talents. When he was 12, he entered a drawing contest, which he won. And as a result, he was hired by a newspaper to make copper engravings, which were the way newspapers were illustrated in the late 1800s. If you've seen the illustrations in his book, you can appreciate how his artistic ability lent itself to this project. Around this time, he was visited by one of the Lemurian Masters, who took him to meet a group of Adepts from Tibet. They levitated him around the room and manifested a growing rose bush from the ethers, many other startling things. As far as we know, this was his first meeting with advanced egos in that lifetime. By 15, young Bob was working and had earned enough that he decided he'd like to go to Hawaii. But when he got to San Francisco, he discovered he didn't have enough money for that trip, but he did have enough to get to Peru. So that's where he went. His first week in Peru was kind of difficult because he didn't speak Spanish and he didn't find anyone down there who spoke English. But after a week, 2 Americans got off the ship and he went up to them to help them with their bags, hoping to earn a quarter. So the bags proved to be extremely heavy, but he staggered with them to their hotel and to their room, put them down on the floor, and he collapsed on the bed. The men were pretty impressed because those bags held rifles and their ammunition and weighed several hundred pounds. So they decided they'd take him along with them. They had come to South America, Central America, and Mexico to prospect. They took him along for the next 7 years. They traveled together through those countries and even up to Alaska when they had the Alaska Gold Rush. During these years, he began coming across remnants of some very old buildings and walls, which intrigued him. He met a tribal chief who spoke about the old ones from the Motherland, who had come to Mexico and South America ages before. If you visit the Fellowship's blog on our website, you may come across one of Bob's experiences with the Mayans of Yucatan, who showed the men ancient temples hidden from the Spanish years before, and told them of the Mayans, or Mu tribe, who had come to Mexico thousands of years earlier from the ancient land of Mu, or Lemuria, as we call it. From the Mayans, the Mayans took their name. These experiences stayed with Bob. In his later travels, he visited places like Pohnpei, Malden, Chichen Itza, Easter Island, finding more ancient ruins, and began piecing together these clues he was picking up about Mu, which left him with a burning desire to know more. While in China, he was invited to meet another master who helped him correlate much of the information that he was receiving throughout these travels. All this preparation fit into the planning of the Lemurian Masters, who were preparing to reintroduce Lemurian lore to the world. Robert Stelle was being guided into the important role he was to fulfill as their chosen emissary. In 1936, the Lemurian Fellowship was founded on September 16th, a date prophesied in the Great Pyramid as the entrance to the king's chamber. With his rare abilities as a true clairvoyant, Dr. Stelle was able to see and talk with the great ones who came to help him perfect the philosophy and teach the students who were undergoing the Lemurian training. For the first few years, he and his wife trained all the students. And some of them who were living close to the fellowship came down to meet him personally, as well as overseeing all the other work connected with building a growing organization. Dr. Stelle was like a magnet, drawing people to him because he was so positive, wise, and understanding. He had studied medicine, osteopathy, and chiropractic, and he favored the manipulative measures, probably because they gave him the opportunity to use his strong hands, through which a healing power came. Because of what we would call his extraordinary abilities, he was also able to help people physically without touching them or prescribing for them. But to the perceptive, his character was his greatest gift to us. In him, we can see that it's really possible to become a finer person, to strengthen virtues like kindliness, patience, and tolerance, as well as humility, forbearance, and courage. As you study his life and seek to emulate him, you feel this thrill of understanding. This is what human evolution is supposed to be. We can see that spiritual advancement is really possible, and we want to attain it too. Most people who were as sought after as Dr. Stelle was welcome the acclaim that makes them celebrities. Making a big splash with some dramatic or heroic effort seems wonderful, and we love to hear these stories. But you know, this may actually be unhelpful in our efforts to advance spiritually. How many rock stars or other celebrities do you know about whose lives have ended tragically and all too soon because they were unable to handle the celebrity and power they attained? We all love popularity, but it can easily go to our heads and interfere with the deeper purpose we have selected for this lifetime. This may be one reason Dr. Stelle would not be comfortable with this much being said about him today, because despite his advancement and unusual abilities, he was a very humble man who did not expect to be remembered for his part in bringing back what we know about Lemuria. After he moved to Ramona and trained other teachers, he was able to start work on the books he hoped to write about Lemuria. But this required what he calls going into the silence. And with his many other responsibilities, this was difficult for him to find time to do. It took him 11 years to write his first book, The Sun Rises, describing the beginnings of the first civilization on Earth. One of the many other things he accomplished during these years was to help the early students start a business that could bring income and offer an opportunity for them to work together using Lemurian principles. Since this was in World War II, materials were hard to come by. So he started with wood, which was plentiful. And he would take the local woods, even eucalyptus and grapefruit, and turn them on a lathe, making little pots, planters, and boxes that could be finished with a minimum of equipment. This modest beginning grew into Lemurian crafts, an industry that has created decorative accessories, furniture, architectural hardware, even fine violins and music stands that are highly prized by people who appreciate excellent design and workmanship. The crafts is one of the proudest accomplishments of the Lemurian order today. Another of Dr. Stelle's accomplishments during the 1940s was to bring back from the Akashic record an accurate map of Lemuria, which you see up here. And a little later, my colleague Bob will tell you about that map and much more that we hope will interest you. It's interesting to know that Dr. Stelle and his wife were also part of the first civilization on Earth and reincarnated most recently to help create the new civilization we're working to develop. It's apparent that many egos who lived in Lemuria are reincarnating now to be part of this promising time. You may feel you are among them. When I first began greeting visitors at the Lemurian Fellowship 50 years ago, most of the people who came up didn't know what Lemuria was and asked us about it. Now almost everyone does and feels a desire to find out what their part was and is to be. Many perceptive people who want to fulfill the purpose of life have used and are using the Lemurian philosophy to improve themselves and their environments, but obviously not enough. As you look around us, you can see that we could use many more. Because doing this fulfills our purpose in life, it is highly satisfying. And it is intensely encouraging to live and work with other people who are also trying to change their lives, improve their lives, and help other people. So they may become a little finer, a little wiser, a little more understanding each day as they work toward the first degree of Lemurian initiation. My hope is that each of you may be fortunate enough to be surrounded with such friends.
My name is Bob, and I've been a Lemurian student for many years now, as has Conrad, and I'm glad to have this chance to talk with you. We'd like to give you some background on Lemuria that was given to the fellowship by the Lemurian Brotherhood, which is also known as the Lemurian Mystery School. And afterward, we'll be glad to answer your questions. In fact, we'll be here all day today and all day tomorrow if you have any questions. As many of you already believe, there was a highly advanced civilization on the continent of Mu, which is also known as Lemuria. And that civilization began 78,000 years ago. It lasted for 50,000 years, becoming the most highly advanced civilization on Earth, and it has been unmatched since that time. Afterwards, it eventually submerged into the Pacific Ocean, and that was about 26,000 years ago. What we'll do today is we're going to talk about what life was like on Lemuria, how the first civilization was formed, why did Lemuria sink, how did that happen, and what we can learn from it. We have two maps over here. So this first map is a black and white map. This is a map of the continent of Lemuria. It was drawn in the 1940s by Robert Stelle, the founder of the Lemurian Fellowship. He obtained the information for the map from the Akashic record. Some years ago, we came across the other map, which is a color map of the Pacific Ocean. And we purchased it because even though it was prepared in 1969, more than 20 years later, by the National Geographic Society, we found that certain areas on that map are strikingly similar to the outline of the continent of Mu. So let's go back to the black and white map for a moment. The continent of Mu on this map is the darker area that's outlined. It includes the west coast of the United States, goes down below Australia, below New Zealand, and comes up to Baja California. And if we look at the color map by the National Geographic Society, and if we could look at the oceanic ridges that are shown in that map, and they go up through the Rockies, the Aleutian Islands, down to the west of Australia, and below New Zealand. When you're up close to this map, you can see how strikingly similar those oceanic ridges are to the outline on the black and white map. The Pacific Ocean holds many mysteries in the area where Lemuria existed, and it's likely that at least some of the islands in the Pacific are what remain above the sunken continent. For example, there is Malden Island, and I'll show you where that is on this black and white map. Malden Island is over here, and on the color map, Malden Island would be about over here. It's a very small island. It's desolate, uninhabited, has no drinkable water. And yet, archaeologists have found in that island 40 stone enclosures with altars. They're called maraes. And these are not a small affair. One of the maraes is as large as 100 feet long by 50 feet wide. Even more interesting is that archaeologists found that there are paved roads, some people call them paved ways, closely fitted slabs that lead from some of the maraes into the ocean where they disappear under the water. So why were so many shrines and maraes constructed on this small uninhabited island? And even more interesting is, where do those paved ways lead to under the water? To the east, on this black and white map, to the east of Malden Island is Easter Island. Many of you have heard of Easter Island. It's where the stone statues or moai exist, and Easter Island is also known as Rapa Nui. There are about 1,000 of these stone statues on Easter Island. Most of them weigh about 5 tons, which is heavy enough, but some of them are over 70 tons in weight. So how did they get these statues from the inland quarry along dirt paths and over hills to the shoreline? How could this have been done? Now, that's interesting enough. But what's more interesting is a little known discovery that was made in 1866 by the National Museum, which is part of the Smithsonian in Washington, D.C. In that year, the National Museum launched an expedition to Easter Island. It's known as the USS Mohegan Expedition. And when they were there, they explored all facets of Easter Island, the geology, the language, the customs, and of course, the statues. And they published a report that's over 100 pages long. One of the discoveries in that report is very curious. They found that on the southwestern end of Easter Island, there is a ledge on this 1,000-foot cliff. Midway on the south 1,000-foot cliff, this ledge held 16 statues. They could not see any way anyone could have put the statues there. The bottom of the cliff is in water, and it is a straight up and down affair cliff. They looked about, they did not see any paths or any other access to that ledge, which would be at the 500-foot mark. So how did they get these 16 statues there? They had no idea. Now, there's a lot of information on the internet, and I like to research it, as I assume many of you do. But as some of you may have found out, it's really hard to know what's accurate. I heard this humorous quote. It goes something like this: I'll believe what's on the internet when I can download food from it. So, knowing you need to be a little bit skeptical about what you read and see, I'd like to go back as far as I can to the primary source to find out what may have really happened. So one example is a story about how the Easter Island statues were transported from the quarry to the shoreline. Over 100 years ago, an archaeologist, Catherine Rutledge, lived on the island for more than a year, and she published a book, her findings. She, just like the museum did, explored many, many different aspects of the culture and the language, and of course, the statues. But important for this talk today is that in her book, she says that when she asked the inhabitants how the statues had been moved, she was always given the same answer. An old woman moved the statues by ordering them about by her will, using a supernatural power called mana. Rutledge said the inhabitants had no doubt this is what had happened. We're going to come back to Easter Island in a moment, but now let's talk about, to the west of Easter Island is Pompeii, formerly known as Pohnpei. And in Pompeii is an area called Nan Madol in the district of Medellano. Nan Madol is pretty well known. It's known as the Venice of the Pacific. Now, why is it known as the Venice of the Pacific? And that's because Nan Madol has 90 man-made islands and canals, and some of these canals are wide enough for a modern-day ocean liner. These islands are made of basalt columns or logs that are stacked log cabin style on top of one another. Well, that's pretty impressive to take a 5-ton basalt column or log, stack it on top of another one. Then add to that they had to be transported from the quarry on the island. But even that isn't that amazing. I mean, that could probably be done. But how do you get them across the water to create the 90 some odd islands? But there's more. There's more than just those basalt logs, because those basalt logs are placed on a foundation of huge megalithic boulders. These boulders are over 50 tons. So even if you could figure out how they got those 5-ton logs over to each of the 90-odd islands, how do you get a 50-ton boulder there? Well, just like the Easter Islanders, the Pompeians have what they consider to be an answer. In their rich tradition of oral history, they say that two brothers who were sorcerers used magical powers to make the logs fly. So how many of you watched the TV show Ancient Aliens? Okay, that's a very good showing. I really like the archaeological findings. And there's one thing one of the commentators said quite a long time ago that stuck with me. He said, why would these ancient builders choose to use such incredibly heavy stones unless it was easy for them to move them? So maybe there is something to the legends of walking statues and flying stones. These are just some of the mysteries found on isolated islands. To add to the mystery, there's also a Hawaiian legend about the submerged continent in the Pacific. About 100 years ago, William Hyde Rice grew up on the island. He was an educated individual, he was bilingual, and he was fascinated with all the legends they had on Hawaii, and he wanted to preserve them for posterity. So he interviewed people and he transcribed the legends, and he published a book, which you can purchase. We don't have it, but you can find it on Amazon. And one of the legends, the Menehune, speaks of an ancient belief there was once one great continent that stretched from Hawaii down to New Zealand. Now I'm going to show you on this black and white map. Hawaii is about over here. And if we follow Hawaii all the way down to the bottom, that's New Zealand. And on the color map, Hawaii is about over here. And if we follow it all the way down to the bottom, that's New Zealand. But there was more to that legend, because it goes on to say that then a great flood came that submerged all the lower lands, leaving only the highlands we now know as islands. And it is very likely that many of these islands that we see in the Pacific Ocean are what remain above the sunken continent of Mu or Lemuria. Hawaii and Easter Island are also part of the tales of the Hopi Indians of the American Southwest. In their history about Cascara, sometimes referred to as Cascorza or the Third World, the Hopi speak of Hawaii and Easter Island as being remnants of this lost continent. Well, this is enough for the maps right now. And I'd like to speak to you about Lemuria, also known as Mu. You may wonder how this magnificent civilization began. The angels who first assisted mankind on the continent of Lemuria had experience in establishing civilizations, in establishing successful civilizations on other planetary homes. They came here to Earth to teach us how to create happiness in life, move closer to God by following the laws of God and nature, and to navigate through the complexities of forming a civilization. How many of you have a belief that there are others who exist outside of Earth? That's 100%. This is a great place to give a talk. You're very receptive. So I won't even ask you to raise your hand for the next question. Does it seem logical that some of the more advanced ones have come to be of help to mankind? I'm sure you're all nodding your head. When I first learned that those who came to help humanity on Earth were angels, I didn't know anything about angels. But immediately I believed it, what I heard. It was like an inner knowing. But no matter what you believe, the truth is there are wiser beings than ourselves, like God and Christ. And these beings guide us in how we can live in harmony and fulfill our purpose on earth. To get back to what life was like at the height of the Herculean civilization, which is another way of saying Lemurian, Herculean or Lemurian civilization. In contrast, I'd like to think I'm an honest person. So here's another question. I'm going to test you. Does anyone here feel you're honest 100% of the time? Okay. No one raised their hand. Okay. How about 90%? Very good. A lot of honest people here. Okay. Now, if any of you think you're closer to 50% honest, we're not going to ask you to raise your hand. Don't be concerned. But it might be interesting to know that in the Lemurian Empire, we've been told that for a period of 12,000 years, there was no report of any theft. Can you imagine that? Think of that. Nothing stolen for 12,000 years. Think of what happens today. Just do a quick mental calculation as to what is going on every minute of the day. How many thefts are occurring all over the world? Unemployment and poverty, these were unknown in that civilization. Life then was tranquil, it was purposeful. And there was a cohesiveness of all the people in the empire. But even more important were the spiritual values that made life so good. For an example, an executive was considered the equal of a workman, and vice versa. A workman was the equal of an executive. And they didn't need a law like we need laws today. There was no federal or state law that said that had to be. People were at peace with each other. They really respected each other. This is the way it was at the height of the civilization. What Lemuria accomplished and what its citizens enjoyed surely seems idyllic compared to our lives today. But if you close your eyes for a moment and just try to visualize what it might have been like if and when you lived back at that time, maybe you'll feel your shoulders, the tension in your shoulders beginning to relax. Maybe less tension in your body. Maybe even the air around you seems a little bit softer. And when you open your eyes, if you've had them closed, you may find that the person next to you looks a little bit friendlier than you first thought when they walked in. But that's what it was like in Lemuria. People really loved each other, cared about each other. It was peaceful and serene. But let's get back to the honesty question. Most of us do think of ourselves as people of integrity. But in today's world, that can sometimes be complicated to maintain. And we'd like to tell you that one of our students, who is a lawyer who wrestled with being honest at his job. It just so happens I'm that person, and that was one of the reasons I was asked to be a speaker today. So I'd like to tell you about my experience working at a law firm in New York City. I worked in Manhattan, and as you might imagine, it was quite a challenge trying to juggle representing my clients, obtaining the outcome that they wanted, and also being honest. This was difficult. This was especially difficult for me to do because I was under a lot of pressure to win and bring in big money at all costs. I was afraid if I didn't do what I was asked, I would lose my job. It felt like I was wearing golden handcuffs. Well, in my third year in that firm, I found out about the Lemurian Fellowship. I wrote to them, and I sent away for the booklets, which are training guides called lessons. And from working with these lessons, which have the Lemurian teachings in them, and from working with my teachers at the Lemurian Fellowship, gradually I was able to find more and more ways to handle honesty in these very difficult situations at my job. It wasn't always easy, but to my surprise, I was able to practice integrity more and more. It wasn't perfect. I'm not a perfect person, but I did make progress, and each success, no matter how small, felt like a victory. It was a steady balancing act, but eventually I came to the realization that I needed to do more on a spiritual level. And so I decided to leave the firm and form my own practice. And when I did that, I made a silent commitment to the Lemurian Masters that I would make integrity the cornerstone of whatever future success I might have in this new law firm. There's a happy ending. Aside from my not being faced with such difficult challenges I had in the New York City firm, I was actually able to help people more and bring more happiness into their lives. And it was an immensely satisfying job. The ease of mind that I created for myself in that job had a ripple effect lasting to today, because now I live and work at the Lemurian Fellowship. So let's talk some more about Lemuria and less about me. You may wonder how a society so great and harmonious could fail, and that's a good reason. Sadly, in subtle ways, the citizens of Lemuria began to move away from living in conformity or in harmony with the laws of God and nature. And as a result of doing this, their lives in beautiful surroundings began to gradually deteriorate. This did not happen overnight. And there were many complex reasons for this. Century by century, mass negative karma piled up. And this was as a result of the people not following spiritual principles. It eventually resulted in the destruction of this vast continent. Over a period of at least 1,000 years, there were violent volcanic eruptions and earthquakes, which caused the continent to sink into the Pacific. This didn't happen as a result of a failure of universal laws, but instead it was a failure of the people to have the will and the integrity to follow them. So often, we seek to do things the hard way. And that was the way it was back then for them. They tried to do things the hard way too. Much was lost, but much good was created that we can bring back again. Fortunately, the Lemurian Masters saw the inevitable destruction coming long before the end. They gathered all the records of this magnificent civilization and made sure they were safely secured before the continent sank. Through the ages, they have carefully evaluated the rise and fall of all nations, and from this have worked out a master comprehensive plan for the integration of a new age civilization, one that will be free from the errors of the past. A key element of their plan was inaugurated on September 16, 1936, and that was with the release of the Lemurian wisdom teachings through their earthly channel, the Lemurian Fellowship. Out of the chaos of today, we can create a new world of peace and love for one another, ultimately leading to our own spiritual unfoldment and advancement. Can we imagine what it was like to be back on Lemuria, where no one was afraid? You knew that every person was guaranteed equal opportunity for education and personal advancement according to their desire and ability. And this was their God-given right. The Lemurian wisdom teachings are available today, and their purpose is to make life one of greater peace, as was enjoyed on Lemuria, to help others on our planet to move toward a new age civilization that is all-inclusive and based on the golden rule. It's a spiritual teaching based on harmony with God and the universe, and is taught by the Lemurian Fellowship, which is the earthly channel for the Lemurian Brotherhood, which I mentioned earlier is also known as the Lemurian Mystery School. The Lemurian Fellowship is located in Ramona, California, about 45 minutes from downtown San Diego. It's a beautiful place set on a hill overlooking the Santa Maria Valley. And you're immediately struck by the peace that surrounds you. Some people can even feel how close the masters are, how often they are with us on these grounds, even though we're not able to see them with our physical eyes. If any of you are interested in stopping by the Lemurian Fellowship, we'd be happy to greet you. Give us a phone call, send us an email, and we'll arrange a time. As beautiful and peaceful as it is there, what is most striking is that you can leave the keys in your car or your phone on a counter and know that they are secure, as no one would dream of stealing, unless that is, you're in that 50% honest group. But once you learn about the laws of God and nature, you know that to take from others is to take from yourself. We hope this has been interesting, and if there's any time, we'll be glad to take some questions, or as I said, we'll be here all day today and tomorrow.